So here we are today, late in the day on a Friday. So I know that's not the time you're watching this, but that's the time that I'm speaking with one of my good friends, Tamsin. So I have Tamsin Webster here. Hi, Tamsin.
Hello, Phil. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm awesome. What
Awesome.
we don't do on Words with Friends is elaborate bios of saying all the wonderful things that you've done in your
Oh,
life.
thank goodness.
But I only interview cool people, so people just have to accept that you're awesome and then go figure it out for themselves. And we're talking today about branding. Branding is the word, and I picked that word for you. And why do you think I might have asked Tamsin to talk about branding?
Well, I think there's the underhanded agenda, but in a positive way. Reason I think that you asked about it. I think the kind of the surface thing is I think a lot of people think that that's what I do, and I think
Okay.
the reason why you asked about it is because I have some strong opinions about it, and how I think people kind of get it wrong, and why I think the process of branding is actually kind of broken in a
Okay.
lot of ways.
So what does branding mean though? Like for anybody else listening in right now, what is branding in a Tamsin dictionary definition?
Well, separate brand from branding. So in my favorite definition of brand is that a brand is the sum total of somebody's experiences with you, whether you're an individual, an organization, whatever, your brand is what people think of when they think of you. And that comes from those interactions and experiences. Branding is the exercise through which you try to articulate what that experience is. And it's that piece that drives me bananas.
Okay. But is it not just like taking a hot iron that's been stuck in the coals and just stamping it on the backside of a piece of livestock? Is that branding too?
That is technically, yes. And it started even well before that in the wine and champagne trade. So they could mark the casks and the corks as being from a certain house. So that's where it started. And I don't think we've evolved much, frankly. I mean, I've been in marketing for 20 years, and branding has been the de facto peak of what great marketing is supposed to be for that whole time plus before. And the fact that we are still having the conversation that a brand is more than a logo tells you something's got to be wrong there. Like
Okay.
there's still something that we haven't figured out.
But you go to the majority of branding agencies, and I've been in the small business world for quite some time, and people go spend fairly significant sums of money still with a branding agency and end up with a set of brand guidelines or a set of documents and materials, which on the face of it, through my experience, still end up being their logo shown in a variety of different ways.
Precisely. And that's
Huh.
my issue. I mean, it is. And I don't mean to undercut the incredible work that brand
Of
strategists and
course.
brand agencies. I mean, I've been one. So it's like, yeah, and it wasn't even that it was not good work, but it's, I think what we're trying to do with branding, it, it really is in fact captured, the faults of it are captured in that mental image we have of the hot iron being seared into something, whether that's a cask or a cow. And that branding ends up being a couple things. It being kind of overly simplified, right? So what we're trying to do, whether it's in a logo or a tagline or a positioning statement, is that we're trying to create something that captures in a moment, all that the brand is. And that's not a bad thing, except so often we try to do that process kind of on the front end. We kind of try to create a brand that somehow captures what we wish we were, what we wish people would see us as. So it ends up being aspirational rather than anything else. And I get it. I mean, I get why people want to say, well, we want people to see us usually the way we would like to see us. And then that branding ends up being the shorthand, but it's like overly simplified. Second thing is that it's fixed, right? So, the fact that there has to be rebrands is crazy to me, because like, if this is what you stand for, what suddenly stand for something else? Like that doesn't, so it's like, and then the third thing, is that it's also fixed in time, right? So it's just not something that allows that slower evolution, and it's not something that generally can adapt day to day. And that's what I would see over and over again from all sides. So I spent 15 years on the client side where we would hire agencies to come in and try to like capture the brand. And just the result, oh my goodness. I remember I worked for a museum where the director was like, well, after the third try and failed branding exercise he's like, well, people just don't get us. And it was more like, okay, this is how people see you. And he was like, I don't like how people see me. So no. Through to just like, they would come up with great things and then it would just never get adopted. And then on the other side, when I was a brand strategist, we would come up with a great brand and it would still just never get adopted. And if you think about it, it makes sense. It's because like somebody from the outside's never going to fully capture the inside, right? So this is why that fixed piece is a problem. And the other thing, and this is what I saw when I was doing content marketing, is that a tagline does not turn into day-to-day content. So having a brand that, some branding exercise produced for you is usually something that satisfies the C-suite, because the C-suite can be like, oh, or the entrepreneur themselves. They're like, yes, that's me. That's a gorgeous logo. I love how it looks. It's fabulous. And then you're like, and how are you going to talk about that thing every day? And so
give me some examples to this as well, because the theory, I kind of get it all. You must have bumped into some things or observed some stuff that you can tell us about, either through changing a name or two or not. But well, some of the stuff you've seen.
Sure. So, I mean, for a little while in like mid 2000s, like the 3-word brand tagline was like a huge thing, and I did a lot of work in higher education. So just imagine something that like they would come up with a tagline that was like diverse, student-centered, urban.
Woo!
Woo! Yeah, exactly. And it's like, unless and what always killed me about higher education was just like, listen, if you're not diverse and student-centered, like out of the gate, like what the hell are you doing? Like that is not the thing that's going to separate you from somebody else. But the struggle would be like, then how do you talk about like, if the only thing that's really been defined across the organization is kind of the output of what you do, like, well, we're diverse and we're student-centered and we're urban, that really limits, like when I have to have an interaction with somebody on social media and they're like mad at the organization because the picture of the theater on the student materials that we sent to them doesn't actually belong to us. A true story, by the way. That's for another day. When someone's upset about that, you can't be just like, but we're urban, student-centered. Another great example is so that's my own example, but people may be familiar with the and it's still the current tagline of JetBlue Airlines. Now I hesitate to use JetBlue because it's not like, you and I and those of us in our profession like travel way more than the average bear. But it's still a great example because the tagline for JetBlue is "You above all," right? And it's great, and it really does in a lot of ways. It does capture kind of the spirit and the ethos of.
I'm tingling just thinking about it. It's like warm, fuzzy feeling. Oh me.
But you know what? There has been at least 2 times where I've seen and I know these people, so I will protect their names to protect the innocent. One of them, I saw a post. She put it up on Facebook, and she was like legit pissed that she had tried. Now, here's the situation. Like, if you've ever booked a flight on JetBlue, you or any of your watchers or listeners, you know that to book the flight, you have to say at least twice, I am not bringing a pet on board. And even when you check in, they come back and they're like, do you want to bring your pet? And you're like, skip, 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 skip. So there's no question that A, they allow pets on board. B, there's a fee for pets. And C, they give you plenty of opportunities to acknowledge, accept, and pay that fee. Just a little background. So this woman I know, not a close friend, mind you, but she was like, JetBlue, I'm done with you. What the hell is this you above all? And I come to find out what she was so mad about was the fact that she tried to sneak her dog on the plane.
Okay.
Yeah. So she was like, well, it's ridiculous that I have to pay more for my dog than my own fare. And nobody ever told me that. And she's like, and then escorted her off the plane so she'd go pay for it. And then she was like, and then you guys have the gall to blame me for the fact that we're late. And I'm going, I'm sorry, I have no patience for you whatsoever. And then, but it came back to, but your brand is you above all. And I'm kind of like, yeah, it doesn't mean that you above all applies if you're a jackass. Like, I mean, so that's what I mean when it comes to like day-to-day interaction. Like, what's the gate agent supposed to do when someone like flings a tagline back in your face? And it's like, well, you above all. And they're kind of like, yeah, but how many times were you told that there was a fee for the freaking dog? Right. So that's the kind of thing where I mean, where it's like, and JetBlue's is a good tagline, and
Right.
they have that.
It's a great example, though, of looking at something that on the face of it in a creative meeting or in a 95 times out of 100, it actually serves.
Yeah.
And it's also why the definition then needs to be drawn deeper, right? Because I think even in that tagline where they're saying you above anybody else, is the you is actually a collective you, as I read it. Not an individual you. It's not saying you, it's saying you as in all of you.
Our passengers. Yes, our passengers are the most important thing. And there's a ton about most people's experiences with JetBlue that would back that up. So it's kind of like it's the opposite of, United's Fly the Friendly Skies, which is laughable, and so that's the other piece that can happen with branding is that people pick something that's so aspirational as to be patently untrue. Okay. It should be Fly the Friendly Skies asterisk if you're a platinum member, right?
It's not always true. I'm a platinum member, as I'm sure. So I don't even know if that would wash. But let's just take this somewhere else as well. And you mentioned rebranding earlier on. And lots of people find themselves at points within their life where they want to go through some form of significant change. Now, you're somebody who's gone through a number of significant changes as your career has progressed. If somebody sat listening in right now thinking they want to rebrand themselves so that other people might see them differently, or what might you bring to that, or lessons from big companies that people could apply to themselves as human beings?
So to answer that, I think it's important to understand one other aspect of what I think branding actually gets wrong. And it's that branding, think of it this way, branding is trying to capture a narrative with a single story. And so let me back up. So a narrative, of course, is this kind of longer, broader idea. It's an unfinished story. It's a story that's still happening. It's a story that's kind of collaboratively built. And it's something like the American dream is considered to be an example of the narrative, this kind of general idea that if you come here, you work hard enough, that you can create opportunities for yourself that aren't available other places. Now, does every story support that? No, but there are plenty of individual stories, everything from, Carnegie to you, that would support that idea of what the American dream is all about. But I don't think anyone could say, but okay, you can only tell the story of the American dream with one single story. Like that's it. That's all you get. You have to tell the same story over and over again. You would think that that's ridiculous. But yet, if we go back to that definition of brand that I love, like not branding, but brand, that's the sum total of our experiences, we realize that a brand really is this ongoing collaborative narrative.
It's like organic, right? It's alive.
Absolutely.
It's a living thing.
It's absolutely a living thing. And so the thing is that so often what we're trying to do with branding is kind of crystallize the narrative with a single story. And instead of doing that, I mean, what we're trying to do is like capture, it's like that, that image of the snail eating its own tail. Like, it's that to me is what branding does. It's trying to like, well, we're going to try to tell a story that captures the story of our story. And you're like, it just doesn't make any sense. And so what we don't look at is what drives the narrative in the first place. Like, why is it that the company or you as a person operate the way that you do? What is it that you're trying to achieve? How do you see the world in a way that's different from other people? What are the core kind of beliefs and truths about the world as you see it? Because those are the things that actually create the narrative. They're like the codes in the computer system that tell it how to behave. And that's what we need to be looking at. And so this is my roundabout way of answering your question, is that somebody wants to rebrand. what I've seen is that the most effective ways to do that is to come back and figure that piece out. Like, what are the pieces that have always been there? Because even if you kind of, you know, and you said, like, I've jumped around a lot, you know, on paper as a career. I went from being a management consultant to working to planning exhibitions in museums, to being the head of marketing at a performing arts college, to doing fundraising communications at Harvard Medical School, to, you know, brain strategist and other stuff. And so on paper, if I tried to have a job interview where I was just like, if I only talked about the nature of the job and less about what I did in those jobs, then they would just be like, you're a crazy job hopper. But what I was always able to do was to say, you know, what I love to do, what I love to help an organization do, is that I love to help an organization close the gap between the potential that they want and the reality that they see. And because I believe that every organization already has the means to do that within it, that there's already, you know, the approaches to do that. And my skill set happens to be, let's figure out how do we articulate that, because, you know, words are really the currency of ideas. We have to be able to take those things and talk about them in order for people to get that. So when I could explain that, and I could show how that piece, like those, while those pieces of my operating system showed up in job after job after job, then people could look at it and go, oh, so there wasn't any like, the core of me didn't change. It was just, how did it manifest in different ways? So when you're trying to rebrand, what you're really trying to do, I mean, I think what people do that's a mistake is they just try to change the story. And a better approach to rebranding is to say, how does what makes me or us, how can that manifest differently given a changed context? And I think it's looking at it from a completely different direction. It's not, how do I change the story? It's, how do I show up differently given the same ingredients in this new situation that I'm trying to be in?
Okay. So it's like following Harry Potter's life.
Tell me more about that, but I like where you're going.
Well, no, but you watch it in that it is the same book, it's the same story as such, but in terms of how that character has evolved from the very first book through to where you see him in, you know, in the later pieces, you've seen somebody where the core of it is clearly made of the same stuff, but they're demonstrably different at two different ends. Like
absolutely.
One is like a monster slaying, like rock star hero, and at the other end of it is a timid little boy in glasses who couldn't talk himself out of a paper bag, right?
Right.
But you've seen that same set of ingredients grow, and I didn't plan on that analogy coming out, but you know, like I like to jump to analogies sometimes.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I think it kind of works. I just want to go somewhere else though with brand, because I think this is showing up in the world more and more right now. You know, historically, if you went to Thailand or you go yourself on a vacation trip, you'll see a lot of the best brands in the world replicated. And there are...
Yeah, Gucci with 1 or 3 C's instead of 2.
Yeah, and now not even with the 3 C's, etc. In fact, the level of counterfeit has rose and rose and rose and rose to a point where actually they become, in some ways, unrecognizable from each other.
Yep.
Now, one of the worries that I see as people start showing up in the world, particularly with small business, micro business, personal brands, those kind of things, is that people are looking out into the world for success criteria where success might leave clues, and thinking what they should be doing is replica or copycat, or that worked for them, this should work for me too. And the result of which is my newsfeed on social media is like dozens of websites that look somewhere near identical with a story that sounds somewhere near exactly the same, and in many scenarios with copy pasted content. So where does Tamsin Webster think about that kind of stuff? And what could somebody listening in think about if they are entering into this space? Like, how do they decipher between something worked well for somebody else, I can learn from it, and how do I make it me and not a fake?
So the first thing I would say about copies and replicas, it's another one of those things, if we stand back and look at it and we go, well, that just doesn't make any sense, because by definition, copies lose resolution, right? So if you ever,
I love that.
I mean, it's just like the more you copy something, the more fuzzed out it gets, right? The less detail you get on it. And so, that's always been a kind of a mantra in my head. It's just like copies lose resolution. Like, it's the original that's always sharpest. The original always has most definition and the most detail. And the reason why you can't really truly, I mean, consumer good, of course, but when it comes to people and ideas, the reason why you can't fully replicate is because it goes back to that operating code. You can't replicate that operating system, in my mind, is in fact unique to each person, each organization. And so, when you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what can I learn from other people, and what about me is in play? I think what ends up happening is, we take some of the advice that's out there about, find your why. And I have a huge amount of respect for, Simon Sinek and that idea. But I think what's ended up happening is that it's much like branding. It's ended up being this oversimplification, where it's people take that to be, what's your singular why? What is your single passion? What's your single purpose? And when that happens, you can start to see why it makes sense, why you get these copycats, because you're like, oh, this person clearly, solves the same problem I do, and they seem to be successful. So let me just copy what they're doing. But again, they're losing the resolution of why they're doing it in that way, given what those things are. And that's not something you can necessarily see from the outside. You might be able to like reverse engineer it based on someone's behavior over time. You can start to, to quote Shakespeare, the truth will out. Like over time, you will start to see the patterns of what drives people or organizations to do what they do in the way that they do it. So that, over time, I'm sure you've known people, and I'm sure your listeners have known people where, over time, somebody who you thought was brilliant and awesome, like over time, they never evolved, let's say. Like you discovered that what was really interesting, there was just no depth there. It was like great for the moment, but there wasn't any actual extra thinking there, versus other people who I'm sure you've seen over time where, to just keep doing more and more interesting things. And sometimes it's in really unexpected directions, but you can always go back and look at it and go, that makes sense. And so, so for people who are out there trying to say, well, how do I actually go out and be different and find my own way? Of course, look at those people who kind of share some of your whys. And while this is you're getting early thinking on this, I'm kind of the belief that we don't have one why. I'm right now, I'm somewhere between, we've got 3 to 5, and I haven't nailed them all completely, but there is the why are you doing this? Like, what's the kickback of, the business or whatever that you're trying to do for yourself. Like, let's say you're starting a new initiative with your business, or I'll just use this example. I've been debating a book, and that's a question that always comes up. Like, why would you write a book? And given certain people's experience, I'm like, this is a good question for me to answer, and you get a lot of different answers. Like, I know somebody who did it because they wanted to get better and bigger keynote fees. And I know someone else who wanted to write a book that people would still be reading in 30 years. And I know someone else, and these are all shared friends of ours, who wrote a book because she wanted it to be like the new standard for how to solve a problem that's in basics. Now, each of those is a fundamental why that based on that goal, you're going to approach writing the book, marketing it completely differently based on what's the why are you doing it? What's your answer to that? And then within that, there's additional whys. You have to be like, well, okay, that's what it does for you, but why would you do this in a way that's public? Like, why? There's another why that says what I could refer to as the goal, but what goal does it help other people achieve? What unmet need are you out there to help people with? So, and I already said one of mine is just, closing gaps between potential and reality. Like I'm like a moth to the flame when someone's like, well, I've got this idea and I'm just trying to figure out how to be there. I'm like, let me help you figure it out. But then there's another why. And it's, well, when you look at other people trying to solve that problem for other people, or if you had a goal for yourself, like, so for me, you know, I've talked a fair amount about my, the panic disorder I had for 17 years. You know, obviously a goal that I had there was like to not have panic disorder, like not have to live within a certain way. And, you know, there's the why the approaches that are out there don't work for you, right? Or if you're looking at what, other people who are serving, you know, that same goal, let's say, why do you believe there's a different perspective on it? I mean, just look at Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, for instance. Both of them satisfy a consumer goal of like a caffeine delivery device, right?
Right.
But you can see even at the approach to the perspective of like, what problem are they really solving? They're taking two different approaches right from the get-go. You know, one of them is saying, okay, well, we're there because, you know, we get that you need to move fast and you just need caffeine. And so we've got drive-throughs and we've got cups that are going to stay hot in your car, and American runs on Dunkin'. Coffee is fuel to them.
Yeah.
And with Starbucks, you know, they look at it and say, well, we got caffeine delivery, but to us, caffeine, coffee is an accompaniment to an experience. A coffee is an accompaniment to a community, a conversation, a place, you know, and of course they famously are about the third place. So that's, you know, the fact that you decided to write a book or started a new company or that you went to a new job is always because something about where you were suddenly didn't align with how you saw the world. So that's at least a third why. And then there's a fourth why, which is, why do you believe that problem is such a problem? Or why do you believe those goals are so important? So those are some of those, you know, they go beyond just values and beliefs. I mean, these are truths, right? And I, you know, mentioned one of mine earlier. You know, to me that, you know, people already have all the resources they need. That's a fundamental truth to me. Another one is, you know, energy sustained over time is power. A fundamental, it comes from electrical engineering. It's actually true.
Right.
You know, homeostasis is the most powerful force in the universe. Like, everything's about trying to keep everything stable. You know, knowing these truths and the fact that I combine that with my outlook, with my goal, with the goal that I'm helping other people meet with my goals, like, you start to get to a mathematical approach of infinitely, you know, of an infinite combination that's unique. And so this is why I think that it's so important when you're trying to rebrand. What you're really trying to do is figure out, what are the ingredients that I have that, given this why of what I'm trying to accomplish, what are the answers to the other whys that are the best way for me to get there? It doesn't mean inventing something new. It means figuring out how what got you where you are will get you to where you want to go.
Okay, so we're back on this continuous sort of ball of thread, something that's like never ending. It's evolutionary. It's not shut that box, open new box.
Yeah,
it's an evolution. I was trying to just scribble out these questions or these whys, and I got, there's this almost like, why do you need to change is the starting point. It's like, why is right here not good enough?
Yeah.
What do I need to move away from? And then there's the, you know, why am I doing it, as in, what am I running towards?
Right.
So you've got that, you've got that, I'm not happy where I am. I want to get from something. I want to get to something. And then you've got this goal thing is like, what problem does it solve? Why is it necessary? Yep. And I'm just checking I kind of got this right. And then there's this, how do you do it better or differently to anything that already exists in the world?
Yeah, how do you see it differently? Because that's actually, how do you see it differently is it's a slight variation on that question, but it's an important one, because when it comes to articulating for other people, the difference between doing it better and seeing it better is the difference between overwhelming somebody with features and benefits versus, oh, I've never heard someone talk about it that way.
So doing it better is focused on the purpose, is focused on the process, but seeing it differently is focused on the purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. Because it's, you know, what we do is driven by how we see. And I can't change what somebody else does until I change how they see. So if I'm trying to do that, then you can, again, it's just the way logic works. It's like, I can't change how you see if I don't fully understand how I see it. And that's the thing that we kind of skip over a lot.
So is branding in some ways the almost a chosen filter or a lens to allow other people to see things as you see them? Is it like not necessarily blinkers, but a chance for you to say, well, actually, if you look at it through these, this is how it looks to us. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to show people in all areas of world what that lens is, so to speak, so that they can see it and say, oh, that's your world, that's their world, etc.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I think, yes. And when it's done right, like I said, I'm not against brands and I'm not against graphic identity. I mean, you need those shortcuts, but usually what we're doing is we're starting from the back end of it, like rather than kind of coming at it and saying, okay, we know this now. What's the most accurate and the fastest way that we can get people, the people who are for us and for whom we are for, to kind of look at it and go, oh, that's me, right? And just think about it from, back to Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, like the way that the different stores look, completely different. So if you're a Dunkin' person, and of course I'm from Boston, I live in Boston, so like we're Dunkin' people here. Like it's really different. And all you have to do is go see that Saturday Night Live sketch with Casey Affleck, and like that's Dunkin', and that's awesome. But like everything about that physical experience, about the brand, about the tagline, American Runs on Dunkin', is the way to capture that belief system that Dunkin' has about food is, the caffeine is fuel. It's about speed. It's about allowing the coffee to go with you. And everything about Starbucks is about facilitating that kind of conversation, that community, that third space that they're so famous about. Again, you've got, white, hard, easily cleaned surfaces in Dunkin' Donuts. You've got dark wood and couches and communal tables in Starbucks. Just the logo from being bright and pink and super simplified to Starbucks being an intricate logo with, even a reference to a literary work. Well, that already tells you that the vast majority of people who go to Dunkin' probably don't even recognize that Starbuck is a character from Moby Dick, and so it's just, you see how everything is a symbol. But I think too often people try to start with a symbol and work back, and rather than out from who they are and why that fits.
And we do this all the time now. I see it in my world. You see it in your world. We see it all over the internet too, where people jump straight to this finish line position and then ask for advice on it. Like I see people on social media. It's like, here are my new logos. Which one do you think's best? And then ask for a straw poll of 100 opinions from people without having any understanding of where that's coming from. So we have this inbuilt desire to be like, I got shiny new. Looky at me. What's the benefit though of taking this right back down to root cause, understanding maybe what is the thread that runs through it, because that sounds like a lot of work. That's like a lot of work up here. It's a lot of work here in my heart. It's a truckload of thinking time. Whereas instead I can go to a designer, I can say, make me something pretty. They make me something pretty. I go, that's pretty. And we can go, hey, I'm branded.
So, it's the approach is definitely for people for whom, a stitch in time saves 9 is a guiding principle. Because to me, it does mean you have to do work up front and you have to think about it. But it's one of those things that once you've figured it out, you don't have to think about it in that kind of depth again, because those things don't change significantly over time. And it becomes very easy for you to say, oh, okay, well, given this particular context, then I've got I now understand how we can take our ingredients and move it and manifest it over here. And by the way, it makes it a lot easier to describe to a designer exactly what the look and feel is. Because how many times have you seen people go, well, I don't know which one of these I like. And they're 3 completely different looks. And you're like, really? You don't have any pull to one of those 3? Or they're like, well, should it be burnt umber or ochre? 2 random shades of orange. And you're like, does it really matter? I mean, you know, I mean, because it's like if you love orange, like it's just, this is a shade of orange that you like. And really people are going to be like, well, I'm sorry, you would be better off if you were Pantone 3722 rather than 3721. Tisk, I'm not buying from you. You know, you see examples of this kind of all the time. And you know, the best examples, of course, are the classic, you know, luxury brands are a wonderful way to look at that kind of timelessness in action. Rolex doesn't have to freaking figure out what they're going to do for their branding campaign every year. You know, 3-4 years ago, people were shocked that they didn't put the name of one of their watches in an ad. And people were like, how could they do that? I'm like, because people who love Rolex know how to find the answer to the name of that watch. Like, you know, they know who they're for and they don't have to change much. And you know what? That means over time, they don't have to do nearly as much work. And where do they put that? They put that in the quality of what they put out. And so, you know, I said to a group I was speaking to this morning, I said, you know, I think a lot of people who are in marketing, and I don't know if this is as true for salespeople, but a lot of people who are in marketing, and I include myself in this. This is a lesson I had to learn the hard way, are fundamentally wired in a way that makes us baseline unsuited to the nature of our work. I mean, because marketers love shiny new things. We love the creative. We love the innovative. And yet humans love stability. They love slow evolution over time. And the example I gave is like, you remember a couple of years ago when the Gap tried to rebrand itself and the world was like, no, you know, and Gap was like, oh, sorry guys, you know, and because they're like, no, we want our brand the way that it is. And, you know, there's plenty of examples, of course, of brands that didn't quite figure out how to evolve the way that they needed to. But so there's, you know, there's examples on both sides. But to me, it really comes down to like, well, where do you want to spend the time? Do you want to spend the time like having to come up with a new logo and whatever every 3 years because it's like, it needs to be new? Or do you kind of just want to be known for a thing? And over time, there's slight tweaks to it.
Right.
You know, notice, for instance, how Budweiser has slightly tweaked its cursive logo over time. You know, they changed it the last time, I think about 2 or 3 years ago. And like on quick glance, you wouldn't notice it was really any different than it was, but they just slightly modernized the script so that it didn't look too old, right? And then you've got brands like Pabst Blue Ribbon, like who didn't change a damn thing. And then, you know, so they were willing to ride out the trough when they were seriously uncool to the point where now the fact that there's nothing different about PBR is part of what people love about them. Like they just didn't change. You know, so there's different approaches, but you know, I'm for, stitch and time saves 9. I'd rather do the work now and then always have something I can bend and flex as I need to.
I hear, and I'm right in that space right now. So the Phil M. Jones logo that we have, I've had it for over a decade. And one of the conscious decisions we made at the beginning was to make the M a different color. And we picked orange because I liked orange. Orange now runs through everything that I do. But one of the biggest reasons we picked M in the first place was when I was working with other clients, or pick a different color in there. When I was working with other clients and I was producing material for them, what we would do is we would change the color M to their Pantone, and then we would be able to co-brand a load of things and they would love it. But that was a conscious decision at the front end. And ironically, we're going through a giant rebranding right now, right at this very minute. So the giant rebranding is changing my strapline. So the strapline we've had forever, which came from a meeting when I was a small training company, like back in 2008, is helping your business reach new heights. It's not what I do anymore. And I've been looking at it for a while and be like, it doesn't help. It doesn't change anything. And then thinking about a rebrand, the rebrand has been changing those words. That's it. There's no other logo into the whole entire world. Nobody will notice a difference. It was only ever tiny. Nobody ever knew what my old strapline was because it never served any purpose anyway. And we moved it to making more of your conversations count.
Lovely.
So that's where we've gone to. Cool. So answer me this, yes, no question, is, do I have to have a website, a brochure, a logo, and a business card to have a brand?
No.
Thank you. Okay.
You said yes or no, so I stopped.
That's good. That's all it needs to be, right?
Look, it's possible for me actually to give a short answer.
No, I think you're right though, right? Because like people think that, what a brand is that set of components of things. And what you're teaching me here today, and I think to everybody else, is that we have to go deeper than that and answer these other questions first. And then what we have is something universally valuable that can serve us over a significant period of time.
Yes.
And it can grow with us.
Yes. If you find what's beneath the brand, you'll be able to grow beyond the brand.
Okay.
Thing.
And then find application to
absolutely.
That across
absolutely. So, I mean, here's the thing, like, you know, when I started my business 2 years ago, you know, I made a decision based on my experience that I was going to go hard and tight on helping speakers, you know, figure out what their ideas were. Now, do I know I can do more than that? Yes. I didn't spend 20 years in marketing for nothing. But the fact that I went hard and tight on clarifying ideas, on how to make ideas irresistible, meant that, yes, first speakers came to me, but then other people, because they understood the nature of it, even if they weren't a speaker, they're like, well, can you do it for books? I was like, sure. And then companies were like, can you do it for a pitch? I'm like, yep. Can you do it for positioning? Uh-huh. Can you do it for, you know, this big workshop we have to do? Uh-huh. Does it apply to a market? I'm like, you know, so it's kind of like, but it all started. So similarly, you know, I'm in the midst kind of behind the scenes of just shifting things so that because there's enough of focus now on the ideas, like I'm pulling back from leading with speaking and focusing more on the ideas because now that's been well established enough. But it's not, you see, it's not a sharp turn. It's just, it's an evolution of what was already there. And it was just a choice in the beginning not to be like, I'm an idea consultant, because who the hell knows what that is? But, you know, for a group of people, for, you know, the circle of people who know my work well enough now, they understand what that means. And so, and even if they don't, like what I'm trying to figure out with my strap line is a much lovelier term for that tagline, is kind of figuring out what that is now for that evolved piece, you know, because I love the one that I have for speakers and I'll keep it, which was don't just wow the crowd, change them. And now I'm trying to figure out for this, like for, you know, what's the way to capture and align the thing that runs through everything else that I do now. And it really comes down to helping people change how people see, like, you know, because you can't change what people do until you change how they see. And so it's going to be some version of that. Because if I were to say, like, what's the one, you know, if I have any gifts, it really is in the fact that I think I can help people see things differently. I can help make things make sense. And, you know, to you, but also to help you make something make sense to somebody else. So who knew that my neuroses in that direction would be so helpful?
There we go. And I think there's another giant lesson here, even in our conversation, even as experienced as you've become or how many years you can go down a set of tracks with something, the problem's never fixed. What we're forever doing is saying, how best do I want to apply what I'm best at in order to be able to make it best understood by other people? And I can absolutely endorse that everything you've said that you are great at there is something that I've had personal experience of seeing you do, not just for me, but for dozens of other people. So you're like, wow, wow, wow. But here we are trying to define what should be a remarkably simple term, finding it remarkably difficult because of just the complexities of it.
Yes. I'm trying to find something that somebody said to me recently. I just want to make sure I don't misquote her because it was such a beautiful thing that she said. So this was my friend Nilofer Merchant, and she and I were on a call, and she said, change doesn't happen until you understand the context in which it happens.
Ooh.
And I was like, writing that down, giving you credit. I'm like, that was beautiful. And that's why things move and they change because the context shifts. You know, maybe you achieved a certain goal. Well, then, but there's always another thing that you're trying to do, right? Or at least, you know, the people I tend to work with, there's always a next thing.
Yeah.
And so that means the context shift. And so as the context shifts, then it means that the other things are going to, you know, kind of manifest differently. So we both have a shared friend in Clay Hebert, who's amazing. And he's well known for his perfect intro, which is kind of the equivalent. Yeah. And his Clay Hebert proved one for me is I help people change how they see. But you know, we've had a lot of discussions about this. Like, it depends on who I'm talking to. I can say pretty much exactly the same thing, but in completely different ways. Again, depending on the context, because there are going to be times where that would just be incredibly awkward when somebody was like, hey, what do you do? And I'm like, I change how people see. Like that's, you know, I mean, there's going to be times when it works and it works beautifully. And there's going to be times where it's just like, that's just not the right way to introduce myself. You know, so sometimes it's, I help big thinkers make their ideas irresistible. Sometimes it's, I help you find what you should really be talking about if I'm talking to speakers. So it's no different underneath. And that's what I'm saying. If you go what's beneath the brand, if you find what's beneath the brand, you can go beyond your branding. And, you know, my favorite thing from a marketing perspective is to look at those brands that do no traditional branding whatsoever and are still incredibly well known. And my favorite example of this is, you know, just when you have a free moment, go type in BerkshireHathaway.com. Now, Berkshire Hathaway is, of course, the company that Warren Buffett, one of the most wealthy men in the world, but certainly in America, runs. And I don't think that website has been updated since 1998. But is anybody going to argue with Warren Buffett? Like, I don't think so. So it's like, it really comes down to, he's such a great example of a company, a brand, a philosophy is more than a website.
Right.
And actually a Berkshire Hathaway brand, Geico, is another proof point for the fact that a lot of what we've been told about branding is freaking wrong, because Geico is in fact one of the most successful insurance companies out there, but they break every rule because they have 5 different ad campaigns running simultaneously all the time. Right? There's the lizard, but there's also the caveman. And there's also like, you know, so, you know, they've got like more than one mascot. They've got more than one thing. Why? Because each of those speaks to a different mindset of people who could potentially benefit Geico. And because ultimately underneath it all is the same basic approach, you know, which they have captured in, you know, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more in your car insurance, you know, it reflects. And I just find it fascinating that they are a Berkshire Hathaway company.
Wow. So what we're back down to is context. That's where this all comes again, is to say that once you can define the context of which you want to be understood, you can then start to say, here's how you should understand me. But without context, we've got an issue. Within context, I'm seeing here as well, we have certain pieces of context that we cannot change. Mm-hmm. Like who we are, where we've come from, our geographic constraints, our skill set, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A load of solid context. Then there's a load of circumstantial context.
Yep.
That is just about the place, the moment, the time that you're in at that. And then there's some context we can choose. Mm-hmm. So we probably need to spend time in those 3 areas, first of all, to say, hey, what's existing, what's not going to change? What are the sets of circumstances I'm going to find myself in that I might want to be perceived in a certain way as? And then what am I going to choose within all of that? In terms of either where I'm going to point myself or set some other boundaries. And ironically, it would seem the more boundaries we set, the easier it is to then get creative within those boundaries, knowing there's purpose and context.
Correct. Constraints breed creativity, as I like to say.
So we should stop making logos.
We should stop thinking that logos will do the work.
Okay.
Logos capture the work. They don't do the work.
And also sometimes they are fun. Why don't we just accept for what it is? It's like,
oh my God, they're fun. Yeah.
It's like coloring in time as a kid, right? You knew you were never going to get it like put on the wall in a gallery somewhere, but we all like to get the crayons out and have fun with it.
Absolutely. And you're talking to a person who literally can't write a blog post if I don't like how it looks on the screen. Like, I mean, so I'm someone who's very visually oriented, and I'm super picky when it comes to what the stuff that I produce looks like. But because, that's part of who I'm wired in such a way
that's part of your branding.
That's part of that is, and again, it's not, and it's part of my belief is because I have to see it. It has to look like how I think. That's the only way I can explain it. It has to look how I think. And so it can't look disordered. It can't look messy because, because if it starts messy, it never gets clean for me. So if it's clean, then I can see it better. And there are people for whom that's not important. Clearly, Warren Buffett is one of them. Right. And that's also fine. That's kind of what I'm saying. It's just like, the fact that I am obsessive about that means that I draw people to me for whom that's a shared value.
Right. I got it as well. So here also though, once your branding is in check and that you know what you stand for and when everything's kind of working in the way that it should be working, then you can find some momentum in the activity and the actions that you should be doing that are more likely to lead you towards your goal. And then branding actually becomes the wind at your back, as opposed to the distraction that is the shiny penny that is stopping you doing the thing you should be doing.
Yeah. I worked for a very wise man here in Boston named Roger Samet, and this is the brand strategy firm that I worked at, Samet's Blackstone, here in Boston. And I loved what he said. What a brand allows you to do is start at step 0 rather than step 1. Like it allows you to come to the table with people already knowing like who you are and knowing more about you to begin with. Like you're not having to do all that work. And so it does, the logo and all of that does count as a shortcut to kind of capturing that, because back to what we were talking about with the difference between how Starbucks looks and how Dunkin' Donuts looks, like you're gonna take in some immediate information just based on that. But the best logos are ones that truly reflect what you're about. So I took a very backwards approach to finding a new logo. Because for one reason or another, I've overseen with companies I work for like 2 or 3 rebrands. And with one of them, I did it completely backwards from how the people say you should, because they were like, well, you should do all this research first, and then you develop the logos, and then you test the logos. But I actually used the logos to test and figure out what this beneath the brand piece was. Because I had the designer create 3 really different ones. And I used the logos to help the students, the staff, the donation, the donations, the Freudian slip, the donors, to say why, which one is the Boston Conservatory to you? And there was a clear clustering around one of them, not because of how it looked, but because of how it looked communicated something that was otherwise hadn't been articulated. And so then we worked backwards from there. And so, they can be useful. I just think so often we think it's the end all be all. Like I said, we think that it will do the work rather than show the work.
Okay. So anybody sat in a quandary right now, thinking about branding, thinking about themselves or their business, thinking about them wanting to make some form of change, what's their step 0? What's their act to do right now?
Their act would be to find those whys, plural.
Yeah.
First of all, what's the next level that you're trying to get to? Like, what's that next thing that you're trying to do? What's the goal for you that's on the table? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to make more money? Are you trying to stand out? Are you trying to, whatever it might be? Know that. I mean, I think sometimes it's amazing to me how often people haven't even defined that. They're just like, well, let me get a brand. And I'm like, why? And they're like, right. I don't know. And I'm like,
I need one.
Stop. Because you won't know what that manifestation should look like until you understand what you're trying to get it to do. So understand what your outcome is that you're looking for. Then the second thing is to say, okay, who am I for? Like in the pursuit of that thing, if you're in a context of a company or whatever, like who am I for? Or even if it's not in the context of the company, like who are my people? Like who are the people that I like to have around me? Like right. What are they trying to get to? What are the values they have that I share? Like what are their struggles? Like what are we doing? And then you can start to figure out like, all right, well, what do I like to help those people do? And how do I see the world differently? And what are my fundamental beliefs? Once you have that kind of stew, there is a fairly, it can be fairly straightforward. Almost always you can start to see those themes emerge, and you can see the through line through it, and you can go, all right. And for this particular goal, I understand what the combination of ingredients should be.
Okay. And even with that same process and thought process, that would relate to somebody looking to make a change of career, could run towards maybe somebody in their relationships, in the dating world. It could run towards individual wanting to start a business, entrepreneur wanting to make a change, revolution of a new product. It could run towards all of those different scenarios.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one of the things that you're famous for is a red thread. Yes. Now, outside of being a piece of string that is colored with one of the primary colors, what else is a red thread?
Well, red thread is that through line. That is the thing that makes things make sense. William Faulkner refers to it as the plot of the story. He references that way. Its history is in the way that Theseus found his way trace his steps into the Minotaur and the maze so that he could lead his compatriots out after he defeated it. And the way I think of it is the red thread is the thing that links. It's what links how you see to what you do.
Okay.
So even if you're not talking from a business standpoint, you are, as you were saying, trying to make a personal change. Like if you can understand, like if you don't like what you're doing right now, and you can kind of look at it and go, well, how am I seeing this that's producing this reaction? Then you've now said, oh, okay, well, but what if I think this is the case? So this is, for this example, I can bring up like when I discovered that I was overweight, and it really actually was a discovery one night right before I had to start a new job when a suit wouldn't close. And so, and I think you know about this. I used to be 50 pounds heavier than I am now. But, I didn't necessarily want to be that size, but I didn't really, there wasn't anything that kind of made me think about it differently or do anything differently until I remember stumbling across this piece of information that said that the normal American woman, the average American woman, was my height, which hasn't changed, and that weight, which was overweight. And I remember it so clearly. I was like, but I'm not average. And then all of a sudden, like, I was like, well, then I'm not going to behave about my appearance in a way, or about my food in a way that's average either. And that started the journey. Like, was that it? Did I suddenly lose 50 pounds? No, but that was the first thing that was like, this is intolerable for me to be this size, because I didn't consider myself to be average. So I say that because that's what I'm talking about when you're saying it's the thing that connects how you see with what you do. And when you can make that invisible connection visible to you in some way. And for me, that tool is words. One of your tools as well. There's such power. Sometimes it's a lifeline. Sometimes it's the guideline. Sometimes it's the thing that you can, wrap around something else, but it just ends up being, it's the thing that makes things make sense.
Got it. I got two more questions to ask of you, and both are to do with words. One of the words that we are here to talk about is branding. Mm-hmm. And I asked you earlier to be able to define it, but I think what would be way more interesting is if we could concisely define what it isn't.
Brands or branding?
You can pick either. I'm going to be kind. It's Friday evening. It's nearly 1 o'clock.
I'll stick with branding. What it isn't. Branding isn't about making meaning. It's about capturing it.
Branding isn't about making meaning. It's capturing it. See, I knew you're awesome. Which means I should probably jump to my final question. See, this is the final question I ask of everybody, but nobody knows what it is because all of these come out at the exact same time and nobody's had to hear them. So my final question is thus: what is your favorite word and why?
That's a good one. And I hope you're probably like, great, I'm gonna have to edit this piece out.
No. This is a real conversation. No editing.
It is. Because then I don't like taking other people's favorite words. I knew someone one time whose favorite word was palimpsest. And I'm like, oh, such a good word. But that's not one of my favorite words. For what it represents, I think one of my favorite words is possibility.
Okay. So give me some more on, tell me why.
Well, if you think about it from the context of, what I was saying before about like, my brain cannot tolerate a gap between potential and reality once I know it exists. Like that gap is possibility.
Yeah.
Right. And there's enormous power in that. And the reason why it's personally meaningful to me is because each of those big shifts that I made from a personal standpoint, losing weight, overcoming panic disorder, running a marathon, twice, deciding to end a marriage, deciding to start one, deciding to go out on my own. Each of those started because I discovered something was possible that I didn't think was before. Someone said something to me. I remember when I was, went to see a therapist who actually finally helped me with my panic disorder. And he just, he said, I had made some statement about just like, I just want to be able to get through the day and manage my panic. And he was like, well, why do you think you have to live with it? I'm like, you mean I don't? And as soon as that happened, I'm like, well, we are figuring this out. And that, I think it's also very sibilant, it's possible. It's just good. It's got good fricatives and plosives, and it's a lovely, maybe it's not as lovely as the word elbow, which I know, who was it? I think like Somerset Maugham that said it was the most beautiful word in the English language.
But you just like their music. Word. That's why you jumped to elbow.
I do. But possibility, there's enormous power in that.
I love it. Now, in closing, is there anything you want to ask of me while we're on this subject? Anything that you think anybody else might benefit on? And then we can call it wine o'clock. Well, we have discussed this in the past, though not here, that you are a master of reinvention yourself. And I'm curious how you have seen, what exists for you beneath those evolutions that hasn't changed? Tell me one thing that you say that has been true for you. And here's why I ask, because the other origin story for the red thread is actually British in origin, where it's the rogue's yarn that's in the rope from the English Navy, where the rope is twined in such a way there's a red thread that runs through it. So no matter what size piece you get, there's this little piece. And I'm wondering, since you're such a dashing rogue, Phil M. Jones, what is your rogue's yarn through your reinventions? I have a very simple belief, and I've shared this with you before, which is if someone else can do it, can someone else be me? Which leads to your word, I guess, possibility as well. I like this idea of continuation of improvement. It's done isn't anywhere near as exciting as next.
That's a great phrase.
And yeah, I kind of, that would be the thing that would run through everything, but it's progressive. It's building on. It's not scattergun. It's one to the next, to the next, to the next. And I believe that the easiest way to the top is lifting the bottom. So it's create a step to stand on, a box to stand on, a box to stand on, a box to stand on. So that's probably been my thread, fueled by, with the fuel in it of an undying passion for helping others. So just like, if I can get somewhere up whilst helping other people do the same, it's like, aha, problem to solve, let me fix, let me play.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's my answer.
I love that.
Tamsin Webster, how do people find out more about you?
It's all at tamsinwebster.com. So that's the easiest, fastest, stitch and time saves 9 way.
Easy peasy, easy peasy. You've been a joy to chat to. You always are. Look forward to connecting with you again soon. And I'm grateful that you got to share this time, not just with me, but all the flies on the wall listening into our conversation too.
So much fun. So thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome.